Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Frontline Events. I'm Elizabeth Palmer, journalist with CBS News and your moderator this evening to our guide to one of the most complex and forgotten conflicts on the planet, that is the civil war in Libya. Before we began broadcasting, we had unimaginable technical difficulties. We're still struggling a little bit, but I'm very pleased to welcome one of our two guests this evening, Amru Salahuddin. He is a photojournalist. He is Egyptian Canadian and has spent a lot of the last few years going in and out of Libya to take photographs on the front line of this extremely complex and very dangerous war. Now, Amru, I think you're there. I believe that you're muted, however, so I won't ask you. There we go. So welcome to our panel this evening. It's so very nice to have you with us. And I should probably tell our viewers that you think you have COVID on top of it. So a double hero's medal goes to you for actually appearing on the screen. How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me. Well, I'm feeling way much better than yesterday. So I did the test yesterday, but I'm just waiting for the results. Hopefully they're not positive, but you never know.
Well, you look very good. And we have a special treat because you are going to show us some of your photographs, which I know everybody will enjoy. But I'd like to begin by asking you, where exactly have you been able to get to? Have you been able to get to both sides of this civil war?
It's practically impossible to cover both sides of this war, especially as a photojournalist. I've been able to cover from the GNA side, the Western cities, mainly Tripoli, of course.
Yeah, so the GNA is the Government of National Accord, which, by the way, it isn't, because there is no accord. But so you've been going in, I guess, from Tunisia to Tripoli, and then further east, for those of you who understand Libyan geography, to Misrata. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. I've been through Tripoli only once. I went to a trip to Tripoli only once, but regularly I go to Misrata first, then I go to Tripoli.
Right. Okay. Well, let me introduce and welcome our other guest, Carlotta Gall. Hello, Carlotta. You in Istanbul?
Hi. Sorry to be late.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. Carlotta is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, currently the Istanbul bureau chief for the New York Times, but I got to know her in Russia many years ago. She's a very experienced reporter. Chechnya was your beat when it was one of the most dangerous places in the world, and you're also a longtime observer of North Africa. So welcome to this discussion, and meet Amru, who thinks he has COVID, by the way.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah.
So I'm just for the big broad view. I wonder if you could in broad brushstrokes explain to us what the civil war is about now and what the stakes are for whom.
I'm sorry, is this question for me or?
Yeah, no, this is for Carlotta. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, so I think what you have to think of is that it's not a civil war anymore. But maybe we start with 2011 and the overthrow of Gaddafi, and that was the classic Arab Spring uprising. Groups of all kinds and all coming from all directions rose up and took part in a popular uprising to overthrow him. But of course, the groups that did overthrow him were quickly armed and became, very strong militant groups. And that's what then took over. And that's when I first went to Libya, was actually after the overthrow of Gaddafi. And I saw the transition, the efforts of the councils and the different groups to try and make something work. And you immediately got divisions and it went to fighting. And so then you got, when I lived in Tunisia, right next door to Libya, they would say there's no one in Libya who sees the greater aim of the state to be a sovereign state, the desire for the country to progress. It's all personal interests and political power, and so that's what you saw, a civil war essentially, different groups trying to take power. And then we saw this this very shocking intervention of foreign groups. And for me, the eye-opener was suddenly planes bombed, and we discovered it was a United Arab Emirates plane. I think that was the first sort of, I mean, obviously we had Americans there, Brits were there, French were there, helping different groups. The Turkish were there, helping Misratan groups. But then we saw a different game coming into play in recent years, and particularly last year it escalated when the group from under General Haftar in the east started to move on Tripoli, and it became clear he was backed by Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and we learned covertly
I think Carlotta's signal has frozen, right? Yeah, Amru, you're still with me?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, let's pause there and maybe come back to you. So when was your last trip?
I left on May 27th, just 10 days maybe before the liberation of Tripoli and the whole West.
Right.
And I've been there since April 2019. So I covered the whole war from the beginning.
Right.
Until the very end, but unfortunately I missed the most crucial moment of the war when it actually ended. And it was striking. It was really striking. Nobody expected it to end in 9 days. So yeah, my last time was May, just 2 days before my birthday.
So if you would like to show us the first of the photographs you've got, can you tell me where it was taken and a little bit about the circumstances? What are we going to see?
I'm going to share my screen right now.
Yes, you've got several photographs to show us. So why don't you get rolling on that?
Okay, just a second, please.
Okay. We are having a lot of, I think this is the most.
I'm so sorry. Ooh.
Oh, hi, Carlotta. We're just going to see some of
sharing?
Amru's photographs.
Oh, great.
If we can make it work, and feel free to talk directly to him. So where was that taken, Amru?
Okay, so I'm gonna start with actually a series of portraits that I've taken of some of the fighters in Libya. This is a project that I'm working on. So what I covered the war in 2011. I also covered the whole war in 2011 until Gaddafi was killed. What I've noticed, what I've seen in this war in particular, and what was dramatically different from the other wars, is the complete change of this generation of fighters. There was a total new generation of fighters in this war.
This guy looks about, that young fellow, he looked about 14 years old. I mean, is he as young as he looks?
The youngest fighters that I've seen is 17 or 18.
Huh.
They are all 2001, 2002. I mean, born in 2001, 2002. So I was actually focusing on this generation who are actually fighting in a war that they are not aware. They were little children during the 2011 war. And most of them, by the way, are killed. Like this young man here was killed a month ago by a landmine. This right here has lost his legs. This right here is killed by a landmine. Most of them got killed after the war, and this is overwhelming. Like, the war has ended and they're still being killed by landmines and bobby traps all over Tripoli, southern Tripoli. This is another fighter who I was supposed to take a picture of at night. He was killed in the morning. So I took his uniform and I photographed it. So this was my first observation of this war, because I've been covering Libya since 2011, and this time the presence of young fighters was overwhelming. And in these times, in particular, during the COVID-19, and here I'm going to present this picture. I'm going to show this picture.
Oh, my goodness.
It's been circulating all over ever since I took it. And it opened a debate that I don't actually find... Okay, the thing is, people started comparing the virus with the war, and they were presuming that the virus is more fatal and dangerous than the war. And they started comparing, even the New York Times, since we have Carlota here, they wrote like a very big article or an investigation about which is more lethal, a virus or a war. It's definitely the war, even if the casualties are way much less. The psychological aftermath of the war, like here, this young fighter is putting on a medical mask, and he was not actually cautious about the virus, because Libyan fighters, Libyans in general, like I'm Egyptian, and like Egypt, like most of the Arab countries, they don't take this virus seriously. And they were actually, when the first case of COVID-19 was announced in Tripoli, some masks were distributed all over the place. Okay, here's some masks, put them on. And they were wearing them just to follow the trend.
Why is this guy wearing that one?
The masks were distributed to his brigade, his small unit, and they just wore them before going to the front line, because everybody's wearing them. And because the whole world is wearing them, let's be part of it. Let's become part of this international trend. And it took him a couple of days, and then they got rid of all the masks and they didn't put them again. And nobody, absolutely nobody, puts masks on the Libyan front lines in both sides.
Well, yeah, huh? Did they understand about the pandemic?
They're actually dealing with it as if it was just a flu or something. They're not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
There's not enough testing in Tripoli and Libya, so people are thinking, okay, we have very small numbers compared to Europe or to Egypt or to Tunisia. But the thing is, you don't have enough testing, so they're not taking it seriously. They think that they have very limited numbers and they have like a certain kind of immunity against the virus that nobody has.
So was this taken in Misrata?
No, this was taken. There was no front line in Misrata at all. The front line were in Sirte.
In Sirte.
In the south. And of course, the other front lines on the west, like the western cities after the liberation of Ghrian. So this was taken in Tripoli, in Ain Zara.
I see.
Ain Zara, yeah.
Okay, did you want to go to the next picture?
Okay, here I think we're covering this picture. So let me try to just...
Carlotta, are you seeing this okay?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the pictures. They're great.
Yeah, feel free to chime in. Where was this, Amru?
This was in Salahuddin front line, and this was the most dangerous front line in the whole war. Most of the GNA casualties were in this front line. Most of the LNA advances were in this front line for obvious reasons. It was the closest front line to downtown, to the Martyrs Square, Maidan al-Shuhada. It was very fragile because there was no coordination between the units and the regiments fighting in Salahuddin. There was no coordination between Salahuddin and Ain Zara front lines, despite the fact that they were very close in distance. The LNA was pushing too hard from the first day, and I was there 2 weeks after the beginning of the war, so I've seen it.
So is this April last year, or
this is
when you said
Sorry?
The beginning of
This was
you say the
in
beginning of the
April.
war, but when was this?
2020.
I didn't catch that.
April 2020, just
Right, this
4
year.
months ago, 3.5 months ago. So it was like 1.5 months before the liberation of Tripoli. This was one of the many attempts to advance in Salahuddin from the GNA side, and they failed at this day. They had too many casualties. They didn't actually know that there were landmines all over the place. And the amount that I have seen myself of Russian fighters or foreign fighters who had Western European features was overwhelming. I didn't see any front line with this amount of foreign fighters of both sides, like I have seen Salahuddin.
Like mercenaries?
Yeah. So let's talk about the LNA. Since I've been there from the beginning, the LNA did not receive any direct aid on the ground until November 2019.
Right.
Then, but from the first day, the LNA drones, and of course we know that the UAE operates these drones, they were bombing from the first day.
Right.
I have counted 32 air raids in one day on a single front line in May 2019 on Salahuddin front line.
Yeah.
They were, as I just said, they were pushing too hard to break this front line because they were exactly 5 kilometers away from the city center. This was taken in Salahuddin as well, one of the many JNA attempts to advance. And it has been all over the place as well. And this picture, this was taken as in Salahuddin too. Every single person, every single young fighter in this picture was killed. The one in the middle was killed in June 2019. The young man in the shorts was killed by a landmine last month. The older guy, the older fighter on the right, my right, was killed by a mortar shell in August 2019. The one in the back with the red cap, with a red hat, was killed in December 2019. So every single one of them was killed. And this has been like a complete, I don't know how to describe it, but I have seen complete units disappear from Salahuddin front line.
Well, you said to me some time ago that, and you touched on it when we were looking at the pictures of the young fighters, that these young men are not really trained military people. They are, they're all tooled up. They've got some gear, they've got some weapons, but actually they have no idea what they're doing.
All of them are civilians. Every single one of them is a civilian who later on became part, and most of them had relatives who fought in 2011. I have made like a quick calculation of the powers that were defending Tripoli. 70% of them were from Misrata. 70% of the JNA force in Tripoli during the war was from Misrata. And if we mention Misrata, and you know how the war was in 2011, the longest war in Tripoli in 2011 was the war in Misrata, was the liberation of Misrata. It lasts for like 5 months in the 7 months old war. So most of them, when I spoke to them, when I chatted with them, most of them had relatives who died in the past 4 or 5 wars, starting 2011, then the dawn of Libya war, then a Karama war, then the fight against ISIS in Sirte. So we're talking about a generation that's replacing another generation that's very exhausted from the wars.
And what do they think they're fighting for?
Well, they're not like they understand that they're fighting a tyrant, as they describe Haftar. They are fighting because they feel that they are carrying the heritage of 2011.
Are they getting paid?
No. And this is another story, because most of the fighters, of the local fighters, were not getting paid. I mean, Misrata fighters, Tripoli fighters were getting paid. Misrata fighters were not getting paid at all. In the beginning
Carlotta,
of the war, they got paid, but very, very, very small amounts. But starting 2020, they were not paid. Most of them were not paid at all.
Carlotta, we didn't really get to finish our political analysis, and we've kind of leapt forward in these pictures. So let's fast forward then to what we were looking at. It was a Salahuddin front. What was going on there, and what was at stake?
So, I mean, this has become very critical, I think, for Libya now, is that General Haftar, who controls most of the east, moved, as I recall, last spring to take Tripoli, and he wanted to take the whole country. And that's his aim. And he has powerful backers, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, covertly France, we understand, is also helping. And so they've made a big push to take Tripoli. And of course, then I think, I would tell you, Tripoli suffered terrible shelling and a lot of casualties. And the Western militias, mainly Misratans, were defending Tripoli because they basically are the power, the strength in the force that supports the UN-backed government in Tripoli. And so you had an increasingly vicious siege of the capital city. And that's when Turkey, and I'm now based in Istanbul, so I've been watching it from the Turkish side. Turkey got involved. They signed an agreement with the Tripoli government in November and started sending military advisors and special operations forces and drones to support in January, after the parliament agreed to send troops abroad, and they began to help the Tripoli government and the Misratan brigades. And amazingly, I mean, I think what surprised even the Turkish government itself, they did pretty well and pushed back Haftar's forces and the Russian forces with him quite smartly. And by May, if I recall correctly, they'd basically liberated the city, the capital city, and pushed them back substantially away so that they can no longer shell the city. So it was a very dramatic change, because I think a lot of people thought the country was going to fall, the whole capital was going to go, and the strength of Haftar was strong, and the Turkish intervention changed it around. So now we have, in fact, a divided country. The Turks have actually stopped because the Russian troops and the Haftar's pulled back from the gains that they'd made last year, but they're still there. And then the Russians brought in fighter jets into eastern Libya. And so the Turks have gone, whoa, okay. So they've stopped, and now there's talks. But we don't know where it'll go. The Turks and the Tripoli government have actually said we need to push on and take the whole country. You know, with Russia on one side and Turkey on the other side, we've seen in Syria for 7 years what that does. The Russian firepower, it is the predominant force, and the Americans are nowhere to be seen. So at the moment it's stalled. But I think it's peaceful in Tripoli, thank God, which is one thing. And then, of course, we have heard, I mean, I haven't been there reporting myself, but of course we've heard significant casualties from the mines and the debris left behind by the retreating forces, and even mass graves that they've found as they've pushed them. So it's very, very grim picture, and it's not over. So it's now a sort of pause, and we're all waiting to see what will happen.
I see that there's a question here from Kimberly, and I'm going to try and allow her to ask it herself. Kimberly, can you hear me? And if so, go ahead. Hello? Hello, Kimberly? No, we're just completely star-crossed today, I'm afraid. Our technology is failing us at every turn. So let
Okay,
me,
well, I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A.
yes, yes. So
One
do,
about
yeah,
reported looting, but I'm afraid I'm not on the ground, so I actually don't know. But of course, what I didn't mention was that Turkey did bring in, so Turkey brought in its own special forces and military advisors and, you know, people who are running these drones, which were critical, I think, in taking out, you know, LNA positions. But then they also, at some point, brought in Syrian fighters from the Turkish-controlled areas in northwest Syria. They do not have a good reputation. Turkey's been training them. CIA trained some of them before, but they're pretty unruly and pretty. Some of them they vary, but like in any of these countries, you get some less trained. Ramshackle types, and you get some quite well-trained ones. And we know in northwest Syria that there's a real variety. And so, of course, that was the great concern, that Turkey was just bringing in Syrian fighters, offering them some quite good money so that they were going. You know, the Syrians, refugees are in a terrible situation here. So you can understand why young men take the ticket and get on the plane. So I actually don't know what's been happening on the ground in Libya, but I would not be surprised if there's complaints of behavior, because the Turks, they can't control everything. They've only got a certain amount of advisors and special operations forces on the ground themselves. They're using the Syrians to do, you know, the hard work, to be the foot soldiers. So it's not ideal at all. And of course, there's a language problem. The Turkish troops often don't speak Arabic.
yeah.
Syrians don't speak Turkish. So the actual command and control is pretty loose as well. So, so it's not ideal. And I think, of course, you know, all the Western powers were very alarmed when they saw that Turkey was bringing in Syrian forces. And then we heard, of course, on the other side, they were also recruiting Syrians from the loyalist side of the pro-Syrian government side to go on the other side. So, you know, awful that Syrians are being paid and used to go in and fight on both sides of the Libyan conflict.
As pawns in this somebody else's war, as if they didn't have one of their own.
Yeah.
Look, I'm interested to know from Amru, what are conditions like physically? I recognize that you were just in the western part of the country, but is there food? Is there water? Is there power? How are the schools working? What's going on?
So during the war, most of the schools were actually operating as shelters for displaced civilians. They were not working normally. Some of the schools downtown or near downtown were working, but most of the schools around the southern suburbs were actually operating as shelters for displaced civilians. But the major problem now in Tripoli that's still presenting at this particular moment is the power outage. Sometimes reaches 12 hours a day, and some good days. I've been there during 20 hours outage in some parts of the city.
Right.
So yeah, this was the major problem in Tripoli, and this is still the major problem in Tripoli.
And if it's a problem in Tripoli, you have to believe it's an even worse problem outside the capital.
Well, actually, it's worse in Tripoli than the surrounding cities, which is
counterintuitive. Yeah.
This is the capital, and it's in a worse shape than the other cities. There's just one question that I actually, since I clearly know the answer. The first question: where do they get their arms from?
Yeah, go for it.
We're talking about a country that has been going in wars for 9 years. Most of the weapons are remnants from the 2011 war. Most of the vehicles, most of the heavy machine guns, the tanks, everything.
And those weapons came out of Gaddafi's stores to some extent, did they not?
Every single rifle came from Gaddafi's warehouses or storages or leftovers. There are some new weapons with Tripoli brigades. Let's say like a Radar force, for example. They have received new equipment from Turkey. But the majority of the GNA force, which is Misrata force, they are using equipment and weapons that are remnants from the 2011 war.
Yeah.
The most of the new equipment goes into Tripoli, not Misrata. This was a major problem between the two cities. We have the biggest power in the West, and yet we don't have equipment and new vehicles, no armored vehicles. So the car that I was actually using to go back and forth from the front line was a leftover from 2011 war, and it was barely able to drive without stopping every now and then. So it was quite risky as well to leave the front line during a fight in this car. And I actually recall that I have requested to go back on foot rather than taking this car. Why should I risk my life without in a barely working car, and there is like coordinate activity. The LNA is advancing, and I'm trapped in this metal box that's barely moving. So I used to go back and forth on foot.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And is it true to say that on the other, General Haftar's troops are also armed with weapons from 2011, most of them from Gaddafi's arsenal?
No, not at all. Most of the armored vehicles that I've seen are UAE, Egyptian, or Jordanian armored vehicles, and these I've seen myself.
And so is that a way of saying that General Haftar's forces are better armed, or at least they have newer gear?
Yeah, they have on the ground. They are superior. They have modern equipment, modern weapons. Very trained Russian troops. There was actually a couple of buildings in Salahuddin frontline that were called the Russian houses. So the JNA fighters knew that Russians are here and there. And so we're gonna avoid walking in this area because their snipers were very precise and very professional. So they would not miss a target.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen them like through the watch holes and.
Yeah. Carlotta, what do you know about those Russians? Who are they? And who's paying them?
Well, we know about them because, interestingly, they've been deployed in Syria as well. They're private company contractors, as it were. They're called Wagner, the Wagner company, and they're run by a close associate of Putin, President Vladimir Putin.
The guy who actually is thought to have run the infamous troll factory, correct? That
right,
messed up the,
but they're similar to Blackwater or something like that. So Westerners have similar companies, and Western armies use private contractors because it's cheaper or it's easier to hire them to guard certain places. Often they're used, as private security for oil plants and so on. So it's not surprising that the UAE, which has a lot of money, hired, a foreign firm to provide the backing. But of course, what it's done is it's involved Russia in the Libyan war, where they didn't have a role before. And so that has really upset the apple cart. Some of the Western European and the US got involved in the uprising that overthrew Gaddafi. France, Italy, Britain was involved, and of course the US. But Russia wasn't really a player in then, and now suddenly, since last year, because of Wagner, which is, has close links with the president, now suddenly Russia is looking like grabbing territory, maybe a base in the central Mediterranean country.
Wow.
So suddenly that really changed things. And what's fascinating as well is that France they deny involvement, but most analysts you talk to and security people who know say they are backing the Haftar side, which is, coming from the east. So they're with the UAE and Egypt. And that means that France, a NATO country, is with Russia. And so suddenly you've got Turkey intervening on the government side, and you've got France. So you've got two NATO members on opposing sides, right in North Africa and Central Mediterranean. So, so Turkey and France are at loggerheads now. NATO doesn't quite know what to do. There was an altercation in June as France tried to stop a ship that Turkish vessels were escorting to Libya. Turkey said it was humanitarian aid. France said, we think it's weapons and it's against the embargo. So they had and so you've got suddenly two NATO allies having an altercation, and NATO had to do an investigation. Interestingly, it came down on Turkey's side, but whatever, I mean, it shows there's real strains and a real mess. And it's partly because Europe and NATO hasn't sorted out Libya. They haven't helped. They've basically backed off the whole thing or helped piecemeal. And so Turkey's come in now because they're very, very opposed to the United Arab Emirates and Egypt. But of course, it looks like we've got a worse war, because when you get foreign powers intervening in a civil war, it just escalates, and it brings in more weapons and more firepower and more danger for everyone, especially the people living in the country. So it's a real mess. One would hope now, though, this is going to force the NATO and the Western world to try and bring a peaceful settlement, but it looks very, very tricky.
Amru, I asked you about food and water. Are people, how desperate are they with this complex war?
Life in Tripoli was quite normal despite the bombing and the LNA advances, but the displaced civilians situation was way much worse, as if it was another country inside the country or another city inside the city.
And where are those people from? Where have they been displaced from?
From the front lines, from the frontline areas like Salahuddin and Zara, from Wadi Rabia, from Khalatat, from.
So they basically run from the fighting to.
So, yeah, some of them were actually trapped inside the fighting.
Yeah.
Trapped between both forces, and tens of thousands of civilians were actually trapped inside the fighting because nobody expected this fight to start in a couple of days. The LNA was mobilizing and threatening to enter Tripoli. Nobody expected Haftar to actually advance and start bombing in the first day, the 4th of April.
And now that things are quiet again, is there enough of a government to help people like that? Or do they just have to fend for themselves?
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I believe that the administration needs to be reformed. The GNA administration, I mean. Electricity is causing a very major problem in Tripoli. If you just keep a closer eye on Tripoli or on Tripoli civilians, like on the social media, Libyan social media platforms, the first issue that you're gonna come across is electricity, the power outage, every single day. So this is a major problem because it's causing other problems.
Of course,
based on it.
Carlotta, we haven't mentioned the O word yet, oil. Is this, has this turned into a geopolitical punch-up because ultimately the prize is large and it's oil?
Yeah, yes, because, Libya is fantastically rich in oil and has a very small population. It's a huge country, but it has a tiny population. I mean, 6 million when I was last there. So, of course, all these foreign people who are intervening are interested in the oil. And I see there's a question asking about the differences between Italy and France, and that's exactly down to the oil. Italy has had a connection with Libya, of course, colonial connection. but has oil interests. But France, interestingly, recently bought into an oil field from an American company. So the Americans are leaving, France got involved. So you see France and Italy are on different sides. Italy basically backs the Tripoli government. France has sided with Haftar on the eastern side. What is critical now for the Tripoli government is that Haftar blocked the oil, so there hasn't been exports of oil from Libya for months, more than a year, and the Turks and the Tripoli government would like dearly to, I think, take what's called the oil crescent. So they would like to continue their advance and take Sirte and Jufra, and therefore gain control again of some of the oil exports. And that, I think, would unblock the money for the Tripoli government, which is critical.
Yeah.
And allow them to function. Obviously, the UAE and Egypt don't want that to happen, and Haftar doesn't want that to happen because that's their lever. So that is definitely the crux of the dispute. Yes,
getting the territory around not only the fields but also the loading terminals.
Exactly.
That's sort of the prize that both sides want, because it means a stream of revenue, and then they can fuel their war or their government. Right. As the case.
And then there's another oil field which is now in the west, which is now sort of Turkish Tripoli government area, but there seems to be some Russian forces there actually guarding the field. So there's definitely a lot to play for in who controls the oil.
Yeah. That we touched on oil. You and Grant sent in the question about oil, and then also said, do you think that in the end the country is de facto divided? Do you think that it's going to have to be divided in order to solve this thing? In other words, are we looking at two
I think it's very hard to say because it's all in flux right now, and I'm really not sure. They had an agreement in Ankara between the Russians and the Turks just yesterday. They had talks, and they came out saying, we've agreed to work for a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire. Ideally, if they could agree to share the spoils, share the contracts, they all want also big construction contracts and part of the oil, that would be fine. But there's a much deeper problem, which is the UAE and Egypt are fundamentally opposed to the ideological interests of Turkey, which is, they see Turkey as backing an Islamist type of governance, and they want a secular type. So they really are, the two opposite sides of the Arab Spring. Turkey's at loggerheads with Egypt completely because of, Sisi crushed the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt. So this is the problem. There's oil, which is always a problem, but there's a very, very deep ideological difference, and Turkey is very deeply opposed to UAE and Egypt in how the place should be run. So I don't see how they could agree. Now, Turkey has been making kind of agreements with Russia in Syria, so they have a sort of relationship, but actually Russia is also opposed to any Islamist government. So Russia is very tricky, and Russia has made agreements with Turkey and then broken them repeatedly in Syria. And so I wouldn't trust any agreement in Libya beyond, further than you could throw it. So I think it's really still very, very unsure. And I see there's also a question from Ian McWilliam, is the US or the EU going to get involved and sort this out? And the answer is, no, that is the huge problem. The West is hands off. America, as we all know, is led from behind from the beginning in Libya, but is just not going to get involved. And we see, you know, American oil companies even divesting. So I mean, I think they're talking to Turkey, but they would quite like to see Russia stopped. But otherwise, they're not doing anything. And the EU is divided. You know, you've got France on one side, Italy and Turkey on the other side. I mean, really, and the EU, we know famously, ever since any of us covered Bosnia, is the EU does not get involved and sits on their hands until a lot of people lose their lives. So, so I'm very pessimistic, which is ironically why Turkey's intervention, although, you know, Turkey has all this backload of problems and of you know, authoritarian, anti-democratic problems at home, but on the ground, it might actually at least help Tripoli stand and survive. And so, and therefore give it some strength to negotiate with Haftar and with the Russians and the rest of them. So there might be a long period of talks going forward from here. So
if we're lucky.
It's hard to say if the country will be divided, but there might be an agreement to divide up portions of responsibility for the foreign powers.
Right. And you said that the oil exports were blocked now. There's nothing going out. Or very
They're
little.
blocked. Yeah, Haftar has blocked them, and so the country hasn't earned any money from their oil exports for months. So that's a huge problem. And so this is why, you know, when I used to go to Tripoli a few years ago, the fighters were all getting paid, and it was kind of crazy, but they all were paid, which made them powerful and wasn't good. But in fact, it's worse if people aren't paid. Whereas now the government, I think, hasn't got any money. They can't pay.
No.
So because they aren't exporting oil, which is their only earner.
Amru, I see a question specifically for you here from Katie Thornton, who asks, when you were photographing the young fighters there, were they aware that they might be shown to a global audience?
Yeah, of course, because at the end of the day, I used to show them their pictures in newspapers and magazines, and they were quite happy about them.
So you went back in with a newspaper or magazine and said, look, this is you?
Yeah, because I used to live with them. I was not staying in a hotel, then go to the front lines, then go back to the hotel. I was actually living at the front lines. And
what did it mean to them? Like, how did they react?
Well, they felt that this is a kind of an international support. They didn't quite understand, and I'm talking about the younger fighters. They didn't quite understand what an investigation means or a political analysis means. But their pictures are on the newspaper, the American newspaper, and they look glorious in it. So, be it. We're
right.
There's another question here that did you perceive any difference in the political aspirations of youth vs older people?
Yeah.
Of course. The first thing that I would like to highlight is that because of the lack of the training of most of the young fighters and the lack of experience, casualties were tripled on the ground.
Right.
Even the way they used to move their injured fighters, they actually killed some of them. Even I told them, if I got injured, do not carry me. Just let me be. If I'm aware of what's going on, I will evaluate my injury and I will tell you how to move me. So the lack of training, the lack of experience has literally tripled the casualties, if not more. So about the political aspirations, older generation, they quite understand what's going on. They've been fighting for 9 years. And most of the young fighters, this is their first war. And they couldn't really connect what was happening in 2011 and what's happening now.
Yeah.
What they understand is this man is coming with an army from the east to conquer the west. And that brings me back to the idea of the official division in Libya. It's not official, but Libya is already divided. It's divided, and there's a crack that's unsolvable. There's no way to unite Libya again, unfortunately. I mean, yeah, it's pessimistic to say so, but this is the truth. It's completely divided now, East and West.
I should ask you, we came away from your photographs there, but were there a couple more you wanted to show us before we wrap up?
Well, yes, I think I can show you a video for a change.
Okay, yeah. How long is it?
If the network will actually help.
Mm.
It's good, but you never know. It's just give me a second.
Okay. We've had such bad technical luck tonight. You're really testing the system, dear.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Carlotta, you see that question, do the Gaddafi family have any influence now? Is there a short answer and of 2 letters?
Sorry.
I think not the immediate family, although there were always rumors that they were talking to people, and even Saif Gaddafi, who's detained, you know, had his ways to mobilize people or to talk to people, but I think the tribes are still important, especially in the east. And I think Haftar he's, you know, I've never met him, but from all accounts, he's very, very authoritarian. He's really controls with, I mean, he's another Gaddafi, but there is the Tobruk parliament. There are tribal, you know, strains, especially in the east. So I think that actually is still there. And of course, Sirte, which is this critical, you know, port on the coast, oil, you know, depot, is Gaddafi's home, you know, home base. So,
and that's where he died, is it not?
That's where he died. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of course, the tribe is still, you know, I mean, amazingly, Islamic State came in and made it their base as well. So I think, you know, I think it's the group that has the force that can take power. But interestingly, when the Misratans did control it, you know, they had difficulty there because they were the ones who overthrew Gaddafi, and they were the ones that killed him, and the tribe, the local people were still were resentful of that.
Yes,
so they had actually difficulty controlling it. So that's another issue to think of, even if Turkey does move to take it.
Yeah.
So I think that the tribes and the loyalties are still enormous. But whether I think the Gaddafi family, I don't think can come back. That's my thought.
Amru, are you ready with the video? Tell us, set it up for us. What are we going to see here? You're muted, by the way. Hang on. Who can? I can unmute you. There you go. Oh, you're muted again.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes. What are we going to see?
So first thing is that I'm gonna show you like a quick slideshow of the front lines so that the audience could get an idea about what was going on. Then a quick video, a small video of the situation on the front lines as well. It will clearly show the lack of experience and training, but the ultimate desire to advance regardless the casualties or the situation.
Okay, and this is still Salahuddin again?
No, it's a mix of, I have covered every single front.
Okay.
I was focusing on Salahuddin mainly because this was the most fragile front line, and I expected that if the LNA decided to make a final push, it's gonna be through Salahuddin because it was the closest one. It was like the tip of the arrow towards the city center. It was a few meters away from the main square of Salahuddin Square. So, yeah, this is why I was focusing on Salahuddin. So I can share my screen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna quickly run through the pictures. I
Yes,
don't
please.
need to describe any of them. Most of them are fighting, and like this is in Salahuddin. The fighting was door to door, window to window, as you know how civil wars are, or if we can call it civil war. But I mean, a war inside a city. And this was the day that I captured this kind of well-known picture of the masked gunman who was fighting, who were firing. This fighter was killed 2 days ago, by the way.
Hmm.
Landmine as well, and Salahuddin.
Hey. Wow. What a wonderful shot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Khalla. This is part of Salahuddin. As you know, as you may know, it's a very big front line. That's actually formed of 5 smaller front lines.
Hmm.
This is Sawani near Tripoli airport. So here's what I was speaking about, what I was talking about. This young fighter who's wide open during a fight, and this one taking a cover is the more experienced and older fighter. So you will not be surprised if I tell you that most of them get shot because of such attitude.
Like they just don't even know not to stand up and be a great big target against the sky.
Exactly. And I sometimes I feel guilty because this guy started shouting when he saw the camera.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, chanting and cursing and yelling. And he was very excited of my presence. So I just put my camera away and I told him, okay, I took the picture. Just get away from here.
Yeah.
Most of them are falling because of such
basic mistakes.
I wouldn't call it a mistake. This is suicide, but
yeah, well, that's another way of putting it for sure. Oh yeah. I can't get over those surgical masks. It's so.
it was a one of a kind day, and it didn't happen again. So I was quite lucky to be able to be there at this day.
Yeah. The light's wonderful, huh?
So this is not one front line. This was in Sawani near the Tripoli Airport, International Airport, Sawani as well. This is Salahuddin.
Oh my goodness. Not exactly precision for shooting.
Yeah, I mean, this is just covering, you know how it is. This is not a trained army, so if you have ammunition, just go for it.
Wow.
Tripoli Airport. And here, all the young fighters here, the oldest of them was born in 2001. All of them got killed.
Yeah.
Not this day, and this is my main story, the big story, the big picture that I'm working on. This generation that Libya is actually losing.
Yeah.
In this war and the wars that are going to follow, because I'm expecting more wars to come, of course.
Yeah.
So this is a small collection of pictures. I don't know if you still have time, if you still have time for a small video.
Yeah, how long is it?
I'm gonna skip, I'm gonna make it like 1 minute or so.
Okay.
Just gonna skip, just jump from one frame to another.
Okay.
So this was in Salahuddin as well on April 18th, 2020. Let's just jump to the actual fight.
Oh. it's just so undisciplined and kind of crazy. In fact, it reminds me of what I saw in 2011, except worse. I mean, they're just,
It has
they
a
don't know
video
what they're
game feeling
doing.
to it.
Yeah. Oh my
You
goodness.
can feel that if this guy got shot, he will be revived somehow. This is how careless the situation was.
Yeah. And what are they trying? What are they getting? What's behind that wall that they were so keen to get?
Oh, okay. If we're talking here, the distance between LNA troops and GNA troops were 2 houses, 2 blocks.
Wow. Okay.
So when I look through a hole on the left, on the right here, I could actually see them, the LNA troops.
Oh my, I see. Wow.
So both sides were visible to each other at this day.
Yeah. Oh, I see. We certainly get the flavor of it. Okay, I see that we're running out of time. We're actually a little over time at the moment, and I just wanted to ask Carlotta quickly. What those people who are trying to understand what's going on and watching, what's the next thing to watch for that will give some indication of how this is going to go?
I think that the talks between Russia and Turkey actually are critical. But also I think to see if Turkey really does, there's talk that they're trying to arrange an agreement to have a sea base, a port base at Misrata, and then the air base at Watia. If Turkey establishes a permanent presence, they will start, and they've made an agreement to start training the GNA army, and they'll bring some reconstruction in. The Turks are actually quite good at that. They can get the electricity back up, water and whatever. They don't have a great deal of money, so they won't be like a UN or an American operation coming in to rebuild, but they'll get schools open, they'll get the life functioning, and they're quite good at getting the administration working. So Turkey, I think, will stay. I think it looks like they're there to stay. So Tripoli might really see some stability and some improvement in the next 12 months, for example. The critical thing will be, will they continue to advance and their offensive, or will Russia and UAE and co try and retake the city or something? So I think we're watching to see, are they going to go back to fighting, or are they going to try and negotiate? I think it's still very, very tentative. But I think for perhaps Tripoli, there might be some period of calm where they can actually rebuild the government and the place. So yeah, nobody knows though what's going to happen down the road. Very hard.
If you've got a couple of extra minutes, let's see if we can get a couple of questions. Are you good to stay with us for 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Amru, you're holding up okay? All right then. So Kari Shah, you can speak if you would like. I'm trying to unmute you. No, okay. William Doherty. William Doherty, have you got a question for us? I can't seem to unmute them. Oh well, look, I'm apologies to everybody. I want to thank you, Amru, so much for being with us. What beautiful photographs, and I hope that I'm glad that you're safe. I hope that the fighting doesn't resume so that you can get over COVID and go back there to photograph a story of peace and infrastructure building. And Carlotta, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you so much for your insight. And I wish you well. And thank you to everybody who joined us. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all your questions, but I wish you all the very best. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.